Most people book an Airbnb expecting a quiet getaway, a nice view, maybe a few good photos. But sometimes the nightmare isn't outside the house. Sometimes it's already inside. Tonight, I've got two Airbnb stores that start off normal and spiral into something genuinely terrifying. One involves a woman staying alone in a mountain rental who discovers she isn't alone at all. The other is about a family vacation by the beach, where a little boy kept insisting he saw a ghost in the backyard. He wasn't seeing ghosts. He was seeing something much worse. Let's get into it. Story 1. He was already inside the house. One of the perks of my job is that I travel a lot. Most of the time I stay in hotels, especially for work trips, but every once in a while I like to find somewhere quieter. A place where I can decompress after meetings, clear my head, and enjoy a little time alone. A few years ago, work took me to a mountain region in the northeastern U.S. It was autumn, and the whole area looked unreal. The trees were bursting with color. The air was cold and sharp, and the mountains looked like something out of a painting. Instead of staying in a hotel, I booked a secluded Airbnb tucked into the woods. It was exactly what I wanted: private, peaceful, and surrounded by trails. The back deck overlooked the slope of a mountain, and the whole place felt perfect for a quiet weekend. I arrived Friday evening, unpacked, had a couple drinks out on the deck, and went to bed early. The next morning, I woke up around 6 and went for a jog on the trails near the house. Almost immediately, I had this awful feeling. That feeling that someone is watching you. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing between the trees. But there was never anything there, just woods, silence, leaves moving in the wind. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'm not exactly an outdoors person, and being alone in the middle of nowhere was probably just getting into my head. But even after I got back to the house, showered, and tried to relax, I couldn't shake it. All day, I kept hearing little sounds. Creaks, shifts in the wood, the kind of noises you can explain away if you try hard enough. And I did. I kept telling myself the same thing. It's a cabin in the mountains. Cabins make noise. That's all this is. Later that afternoon, I headed into town for work. I met up with co-workers. We handled what we needed to do, and afterward we grabbed drinks together. If I'm being honest, I delayed going back to that house as long as I could. It sounds ridiculous now, but I really didn't want to be there alone again. Something about the place had gotten under my skin. I even suggested we keep hanging out a little longer, but by around 10, everyone wanted to call it a night. So I drove back. The whole way there, I kept trying to talk myself down. I told myself I was tired, jumpy, overthinking things. I told myself I'd lock every door, go to sleep, and laugh about it in the morning. When I got inside, I checked the locks more than once, maybe more than 3 times. Then I went upstairs and tried to sleep. It didn't happen. Every time I started to drift off, some sound would yank me back awake. A thud, a creak, something outside, something inside. I even tried playing music on my phone just to drown it out, but it didn't help. A little after midnight, I finally gave up on sleep. I decided to go downstairs and step out onto the back deck for a cigarette before deciding whether I should just leave early. I grabbed my coat and phone and headed downstairs. At the bottom of the staircase, the living room opened into a dark kitchen and dining area. Moonlight was coming in through the back windows, barely lighting the room. And the second I stepped off the last stair, I froze. Something looked wrong. There was a shape in the kitchen. At first I thought it was just shadow, just darkness playing tricks on me. But then I realized the moonlight was being blocked by something solid. Someone was standing there. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. I reached for the light, and when the room lit up, there was a man standing in my kitchen. He looked filthy, tall, mid-30s maybe, long hair, thick beard. He was slightly hunched forward and staring straight at me like he'd been caught in the middle of something. Neither of us moved. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt endless. Then, without warning, he charged at me. Not full speed at first, almost like a sudden lunge, but it was enough. I spun around and ran. There was a kitchen island between us, and that split second was the only reason I made it upstairs. I bolted into my bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I tried to get words out. I told her there was a man inside the house, that I didn't know him, that he was trying to get into my room. Then the banging started, violent. Full force hits against the bedroom door. He wasn't just testing the handle. He was trying to break it down. And while he was slamming into the door, he started yelling. What made it worse was that none of it made sense. He kept shouting things like, "I love you," and "I've changed," and "Please let me talk to you." At first, I thought I was misunderstanding him. Then I realized something even more terrifying. He thought I was someone else. I screamed back that he had the wrong person, that I had no idea who he was. But he either didn't hear me or didn't care. He just kept pounding on the door over and over while saying the same unhinged things, though it started to splinter. At one point, I could actually see his hand punching through part of the door. That's when I heard sirens. I have never felt relief like that in my life. Everything happened fast after that. There was shouting downstairs, a crash, and more yelling. I panicked and climbed out the bedroom window onto a small section of roof, thinking if he got through that door before police got to me, I needed some way out. An officer saw me and helped me down. They had already tackled a man before he could reach me. While they were arresting him, he was still screaming, still ranting, still acting like he belonged there. Eventually, the owner of the house was contacted, and the truth came out. The man was her ex-fiancé. Apparently, after a messy breakup, he had disappeared for a while. What no one knew was that he had come back to the property and had been secretly staying inside the house. Not outside, inside. Police found food wrappers, empty cans, and signs that he'd been hiding there for days, in one of the closets. That means while I was sleeping there alone, while I was hearing those weird cabin noises, while I was telling myself I was being irrational, he was already in the house with me. And it gets worse. Police told me he had taken a kitchen knife and tucked it into his waistband. They think I walked in on him while he was getting it. If I hadn't gone downstairs when I did, I don't know what would have happened next. To this day, I still think about the fact that I checked every lock in that house. And it didn't matter, because the danger was never trying to get in. It was already there. Story 2, my son said he saw ghosts. Last summer, my wife and I decided to take the kids on a short beach vacation. Nothing fancy, just a few nights away, somewhere quiet, somewhere close enough to walk to the ocean. We found an Airbnb near the end of a dead-end street. It wasn't beachfront, but it was affordable, private, and only a few minutes from the water. Behind the house was a narrow creek and a line of trees, which made the place feel isolated in a good way. At least, that's how it felt at first. We got there in the afternoon, spent a few hours at the beach, and honestly, it seemed like the perfect trip. My son and daughter, who usually argue nonstop, were actually getting along. They were laughing, playing, and acting like best friends for once. That ended up being the best part of the vacation. That night, we unpacked, made dinner, played cards, and went to bed without a second thought. The next morning at breakfast, I noticed my son looked awful. He was pale, exhausted, and barely touched his food. When I asked him what was wrong, he just stared down at the table. It took some convincing before he finally told us. He said he saw a ghost outside his window. He was only 8, so at first I figured it was just imagination or a nightmare. But he seemed genuinely shaken. He said he'd seen dark shapes moving in the backyard during the night. According to him, they came out from the tree line, moved close to the house, then slipped back into the dark. He even said one of them turned and waved at him. He was trying not to cry while telling us. My wife, daughter, and I all tried to calm him down. We told him it was probably shadows, branches, maybe someone walking nearby, maybe even a dream. Eventually he settled down, and we went on with the day. We spent hours at the beach, Came back sunburned and tired, and for a while things felt normal again. But when we got back to the house that evening, I noticed the door wasn't locked. I asked my wife if she'd left it that way. She wasn't sure. That bothered me more than it should have. But after checking the place over, nothing looked disturbed. So we let it go. That night, after dinner and another round of card games, the kids went to bed. My wife and I stayed up a little longer. Close to midnight, there was a soft knock on our bedroom door. It was my son, and he was trembling so badly he could barely talk. He said the ghosts were back. This time, he said one of them had tapped on his window. Then, according to him, it spoke. It told him if he screamed, it would hurt the whole family. And then it told him to open the door. That was the moment my stomach turned cold. I still didn't believe in ghosts, obviously, but I did believe my son was terrified for a reason. I checked outside and didn't see anyone. The yard floodlight was on, which felt unsettling, but that could have been triggered by anything. Still, I didn't want him sleeping alone after that, so he stayed in our room that night. The next morning, he looked even worse. He barely slept, and honestly, neither did we. That's when I came up with a plan. I told the family we'd all camp out together in the living room that night. We built a blanket fort, dragged pillows and blankets downstairs, and turned it into a family sleepover. My thinking was simple. If something really was scaring him, I wanted all of us together. For a while it worked. We played games, laughed, and eventually everyone fell asleep in the living room. Then sometime around 2:30 in the morning, I felt my son shaking me awake. He whispered, "They're here." Still half asleep, I looked toward the sliding glass door, and this time I saw them. 3 figures were standing right outside the glass. They were dressed in dark clothing and wearing black masks with huge white eyes that reflected in the light. For one disoriented second, I almost understood why my son had called them ghosts. They looked unreal. Then one of them grabbed the sliding door handle and tried to open it. Everything exploded at once. My wife and daughter woke up screaming. I jumped to my feet and grabbed the nearest thing that looked remotely useful, a heavy walking stick we'd brought in earlier. My daughter, thankfully thinking faster than any of us, called 911. The 3 men didn't run. That's the part I'll never forget. They stood there looking at us, almost enjoying the panic they were causing. One of them pulled out a knife and held it up against the glass like he wanted us to see exactly what he had. I remember yelling, but I couldn't tell you what I said. Something about getting away from my family. Something angry. Something desperate. In that moment, all I knew was that there were 3 masked men outside the house. My children were screaming, and a locked glass door was the only thing between us and them. Then, suddenly, chaos turned in our favor. Out of nowhere, one of the men was slammed to the ground by a police officer. The other 2 took off running, but they didn't get far. More officers moved in and caught them before they could disappear. It turns out police had already been nearby and reached the house just in time. When the masks came off, what shook me almost as much as the attack itself was how normal they looked. They weren't monsters. They were just 3 young men. 2 were in their 20s. One was still a teenager. Police later told us all 3 were carrying knives. All 3. That means if they had gotten that door open, there's no telling how that night would have ended. What my son had been seeing the whole time weren't ghosts. He'd seen these men lurking in the backyard the night before, maybe even earlier than that. He wasn't imagining anything. He was the first person in the family to realize something was wrong. Later, law enforcement told us that there had been issues in the area with local criminals targeting tourists, especially families staying in rentals. Families were seen as easier to intimidate, easier to corner, and more likely to have cash or valuables. That explanation didn't comfort me at all. If anything, it made me feel worse, because it meant this wasn't random, and it probably wasn't their first time. We finished cooperating with police, but the vacation was over, completely over. My family was emotionally wrecked. My son had nightmares for weeks. Honestly, all of us did. People talk a lot about Close calls, like they're just stories you tell later. But when you hear your kids screaming in fear, when you're standing there helpless behind a locked door, when you realize how close evil got to your family, that doesn't fade quickly. We never went back to that house, and we never will.